Hello, and welcome to the Project Elected podcast. Project Elect is a nonpartisan nonprofit whose goal is pretty simple. We want to get more Latter-day Saint women involved in public service. On this podcast, we interview amazing Latter-day Saint women who are involved in public service. Hi, my name is Audrey Perry-Martin. I'm the founder of Project Elect and the host of this podcast. I am so excited to be able to interview Representative Celeste Maloy today. She is the representative for Utah's 2nd Congressional District. She is the only member of Congress who's a woman from Utah, and I am so excited to talk to her today. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Maloy.
Thanks. I'm excited to be doing this podcast.
Great. I want to start and just ask you to introduce yourself. I know some of our listeners will know all about you and some don't. Tell me about your journey and how you ended up running for Congress and winning.
Okay. It's fun that you asked that this week because it's the last week of May, first week of June. And it dawned on me this week that this all started 1 year ago. I was a staffer, and I'll tell the backstory of how I got there, but I was a staffer and I was content to be a staffer. And I found out the day after Memorial Day last year that my boss was resigning. It came out of the blue. I was really surprised. And I thought, I've got to start working on my resume and figure out what to do next. As a staffer, you always know that you're one bad day away from unemployment, and it's probably not going to be your bad day. And I knew I was going to have to figure out my next step. This was not on my radar, but I'll back up and tell you the whole backstory of how I even got to that point. But this is a good time for reflecting, where it's the 1 year anniversary, basically. I grew up in a really small town in Nevada, and I am the 4th of 6 kids. I have 3 older brothers, and then my sister's just younger than me, and we have a baby brother. And I grew up in a world where I didn't really have big ambitions or big dreams. In fact, I thought ambition was a dirty word. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. All of my friends' moms were stay-at-home moms, and I just assumed I would grow up, get married, have a bunch of kids, and stay at home. I remember as a freshman in college thinking, I've got to hurry up and finish school because I want to get a college degree. And most of the women I knew went to college for a year or two, dropped out, got married, had families. So I felt all this pressure to make sure that I finished in 4 years, because I thought if it took me longer than that, I probably would get married and not finish. And I just turned 43 last week and I'm still not married. So it turns out the timeline was a little longer than I expected, but I knew I needed to go to college. I knew I couldn't make a living in my hometown, and I knew I needed to be able to pay for college. I was involved in FFA in high school. I think I mostly joined so I could meet boys from other schools. When you live in a really small town, that's important. And I did soil judging and range judging. Those were my 2 FFA contests. And my senior year of high school, I won the soil judging contest at SUU. And the winner of that contest gets a full ride scholarship to SUU as long as they major in agriculture. So I went to SUU, majored in agriculture, and that's how I made my life plan. There was really no master plan to it. I loved my ag classes. I really liked the idea of working in an ag-related field. It was people that I naturally relate to. And when I was about halfway through my undergrad, I got an internship with the USDA at the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I hadn't even heard of it before the day one of my professors told me I should fill out this application. And that internship turned into a job when I graduated, a full-time job. So I graduated from SUU in Cedar City, Utah, and moved 50 miles up I-15 to Beaver, Utah. And I was working with farmers and ranchers using my degree. And I thought that it was really cool that I already had a career. I was putting money into my retirement account. I had insurance. I was 21, and I thought I just had life by the tail. And I really liked the job, but I kept thinking, am I really going to do this for the rest of my life? Is this what I'm going to do forever? Again, I still kept thinking I'd probably get married and quit at some point and stay home and have kids. And as the years started to go by, I liked the job. I felt like I was getting really good at the job, but I was always explaining federal policies to the people that I was working with. And a lot of times they'd say, that's dumb. Why is that the policy? I don't know. I don't make the policy. I just know that's the policy. I was in Beaver through all of my 20s. I was 21 when I moved there. I was 31 when I left. And as I started getting closer to 30, I started getting antsy and wanting to make a change. And I thought about going back to school. I decided to apply for law school. I didn't know if I'd get in, so I thought I'll just take the LSAT. I kind of Googled, how do you apply for law school? I really didn't know what I was doing. And I thought if I get in, then maybe I'll go to law school. If I don't get in, then no one's ever going to know I applied. And I took the LSAT. I started sending in applications. And then I told my sister what I was doing one day in her office, and she pulled her desk drawer open and showed me her LSAT study book. She was also studying for the LSAT and planning on going to law school. We just hadn't talked about it. We ended up in the same class at BYU. So,
oh, how cool.
God works in mysterious ways. Yeah. I thought maybe going to law school was going to be a big departure from, I've been working in natural resources and agriculture. I went to law school. I knew that was the stuff I liked, but I thought I'll just do law school and see what I learned. Maybe I'll want to make a drastic change into a different area. But I loved the natural resources law classes. I loved water law. I took public lands and natural resources twice because two different people taught it. And I just was really drawn to that. So when I graduated from law school, I didn't have a job. And graduating from law school without a job, everybody's really stressed. I ended up in St. George in Washington County. I got a job as a deputy county attorney down there and went back to Southern Utah. And I was doing public lands law for the county. I worked on BLM plans. This was stuff that I'd been preparing for my whole life. I just didn't know it. Through that work, I got to know our federal delegation. I'd never met a member of Congress before that. I didn't have any interest in being in politics. I liked, following politics and talking politics and political theory, but I didn't ever think that I would be involved in it. In fact, the first time I ever went to Washington, D.C. was a year after I graduated from law school, and I only went for my brother's medical school graduation. But as I got to know the delegation and I got to know policy, I realized that policy work was what I really wanted to be doing. I wanted to be changing bad policies and making them better. That's what got me thinking about law school in the first place. I was a few years in, and my congressman, Chris Stewart, called and offered me a job. So I went to work for him as his legal counsel and handled all of his natural resources issues for the Utah 2nd District. And that's what led to the story I started with. So I was a staffer. I was happy being a staffer. I felt like I was solving problems for the people I care about and getting to be in the mix and working policy. And when I found out he was resigning and he encouraged me to run, I realized that I really cared how this policy got made. And if I was walking away, I was going to have to trust whoever came along after me to care as much as I did about policy. Or I could run and be driving the policy from my office and for that district that I care so much about. So I threw my hat in the ring and decided to run for Congress, which surprised everybody who knows me. Nobody expected this move, including me. And it was a special election. So there were no other elections going on in the state at the time. There were local elections, but no other federal or statewide elections going on. And we got a lot of attention. There were a lot of people who ran for the office. I went through the convention. I won at the special convention. And then I ran a primary, and that also got a lot of attention. So I took a crash course in talking in front of a camera and answering questions. And I was learning it all on the job. Even though I had been involved in a congressional office, I didn't work on the campaign side. And so 6 months ago, I was sworn in as a member of Congress. And in the last 6 months, I've been running for office for 5 months of it because I won in a special and now we're in the regular cycle. So you're talking to me 3 weeks before a primary, and it'll be the 5th election I've run in 1 year. And it's been wild and glorious and wonderful, and I'm exhausted. And you're getting a great unfiltered version of what this is like. Well, it's still really fresh.
Yeah, I'm sure you're a campaign pro now, having to run that many elections. I mean, that's Utah. You have an extra one in there anyway because of the convention, and then you'd have to do it 2 years in a row. But I love your story because you're not the traditional politician. You're not the poli-sci major who works on the Hill thinking, I'm going to go home and run. The way you described your career, like getting a scholarship in high school, and that's just what you did. You liked it. You kept doing it, and you really focused on an issue that is perfect for Utah. That's such a big part of what Utah needs to be concerned about federally, right? Is the land and water issues. Yes. And so you were just the perfect person for the job. And I remember Representative Stewart just came out so much in your favor and endorsing you. So that's such a great story. I love it.
Thank you. And since you mentioned Congressman Stewart, I have to tell you a story there. It's been really fun for me to watch. I think the world of him. He was a great boss. He's been a great mentor. He's been a good friend to me even still. Most people who leave elected office don't like the person who comes along behind them. It's the quiet part that nobody says out loud, but most people don't like whoever replaces them. Chris Stewart's been amazing with me, but I've teased him for the last few months that he could run for Woman of the Year in Utah this year and win because he stepped down because of his wife's health needs. And I have people all over the place saying nobody ever does that. A lot of members of Congress end up divorced. Their kids hate him because they give everything to the job. And the fact that he was willing to prioritize his wife and his family's needs over that got him a lot of kudos. And then he did campaign hard for me and he gave me a lot of support. I've had a lot of experiences where someone's pulled me aside at an event and said, I can't believe that he's working this hard. The big boys in politics never come out and help the female candidates. Like women always get left on their own. It's not completely true. There have been examples, but if people have just been so impressed with how much he helped me. And Rob Bishop endorsed me and he made a commercial for me and put in a lot of time. And it's been really heartwarming to see the way women have reacted to seeing the men who are already in the system and have it made helping. I'm pretty young for a member of Congress, and helping a younger female politician come along has really inspired a lot of women in the state. And I've loved seeing that because I'm all for helping women and women paving the trail behind them and making it better for other women who are coming along. But the truth is we need help from men too. And it's great to see them step up and do it.
That's such a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. I have noticed, because at Project Elect, obviously, we're very focused on getting more women elected. And there has been a shift in Utah in the past year or so. It's just so much more acceptable, or I don't know if that's the right word, but women are thinking more about running for office and getting involved in this. And you're partially to credit for that. And I think there's just all these things coming together that are letting even men see that women can run for office, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe that wasn't always the case in the past. So that's such a great point. And I did want to ask you, you are the only female member of Congress in the Utah delegation. How is that? How has that been? Yeah. Has that been difficult? What's that like? And also, I mean, you're so outnumbered in the House as well, gender-wise.
Yeah, so I'll start with the House first, and then I'll bring it down to Utah, because I was just on a call this morning where I learned a statistic. 10 years ago, there were 11 Republican women in the House. And when I got sworn in, I was the 34th. I haven't fact checked that. I just heard that this morning. We are at a point where I think the floodgates are opening and it's starting to happen. And it's worth stopping and acknowledging that. My grandmas didn't really have this option. I don't know that my mom could have done what I'm doing. And I'm benefiting from all the work they did and women their age did to break down some barriers and to set examples and to show women that we can do a lot of the things that we haven't traditionally been as involved with. And so I'm not blazing this trail. It was blazed before me. I'm the 5th Congresswoman from Utah, but 5's still a pretty low number. So I'm not blazing the trail, but I do feel a responsibility to try to improve the trail and make it easier for other people who come after me. And then you asked what it's like to be a woman in the Utah delegation. Right. I've never really tried it the other way. I've been a woman the whole time. So I don't know that I can compare and contrast, but it's been a good experience. I do think there are things about it that are harder. I think people are used to seeing men in these positions. And especially, not only am I a woman, but I was a staffer. And a lot of people knew me as a staffer. And I've had to work pretty hard to overcome the impression people have of me that I'm staff and I'm not the principal. And so I still get a lot of phone calls from people who want me to send them emails or get things done for them, which is great. I love to help. But a lot of times I'm like, no, they wouldn't have asked any other member of Congress to do this. They still think of me as support staff, and I'm a good helper. So I do. But there are some different challenges when you are a female member. And the other women in the House have been really good, especially the Republican women have taken me under their wing and helped me along the way, helped me learn things. And one of the things I have learned is that a lot of the things that we think of as being challenges for women running for office are probably honestly harder for moms who run for office. And I will be big enough to admit this. I don't have some of the challenges that some of my female colleagues have. I don't have a husband and kids waiting at home for me. So if I fly back to Utah after votes and I need to go do a political event or attend a community event, I can. I don't need to be home for bedtime. I don't have kids who've been missing me all week and now need my time, or a husband who needs my emotional support. It is a little easier for me than it is for some of my colleagues who have those pressures at home that I just don't have.
I think that's big of you to admit that. And it would be interesting in a different perspective that you're coming from. Yeah. But I also hadn't even thought about the transition from a staffer to the member and how I worked on the Hill for a while. And that would be strange. That would be an odd kind of shift with people you've worked with forever.
Socially, it's very awkward. I always ask people if they've watched Downton Abbey, because if they have, then they get this. But I'm the chauffeur who just married the boss's daughter. All of my friends are downstairs and now I'm upstairs, and it's been a strange transition. But one of the best parts has been watching the way staffers and even the Capitol Police react to seeing me coming in as a member of Congress and wearing a congressional pin on my chest. The staffers are so excited and they're so supportive. And you know, this is a former staffer. Staffers do all the work, and I think feel like unsung heroes a lot. And seeing a staffer make that transition is really exciting for other staffers. And I think a lot of people would probably expect it to go the other way, that staffers would be kind of maybe petty about it or try to minimize what an accomplishment it is. But people I didn't even know that I used to see in the hall have come up and given me a big hug and congratulated me. And the Capitol Police have been awesome. They're so excited. So that part has been socially really awkward, but it's been heartwarming to see the way people have responded.
That's so interesting. You should write a book about that one day. I would love to read that. So you told the story about what inspired you to run for office. And then when you decided to run, I'm assuming it was pretty fast. Like you had to get up and running pretty quickly with a special election. How did you gather a team? How did you figure out who was going to be your campaign manager and who you could trust to do these things?
That is a great question. And I wish I had a really inspiring answer. The truth is, I didn't have anything. I had $0. I was not planning a campaign, so I didn't have any money in the account. And I was a staffer, so it's not like I had a bunch of money saved up. And I don't come from a family with money. And so when I started really considering running, Congressman Stewart told me to think about it. And I said, let me go home and think on it and pray on it and sleep on it. I'll do my spiritual due diligence and I'll come back and talk. And I really thought I would come back and say no. But I prayed about it and I really felt good about, I'm not saying God told me to run or he told me I would win, because I think that's a dangerous thing for politicians to say. And it's not true. But I felt good about trying. I thought it'll at least be a good experience, however it turns out. So I went back and said, okay, I think I'm going to do it. And I've never done this before, so I've got to build a team. And he said, go out and start calling people, figure out how you're going to do it. And at first, I had a really hard time finding a team. With that special election going on, a lot of people had decided to run. And teams got scarce really quickly. I found a finance person, a campaign treasurer. You have to have one of those when you file. And I found her through a friend. And then I called several people and asked them to manage my campaign. And they were either managing one or they're like, I can't on this short notice. I have things going on this summer. So I started off without anybody. I had a treasurer and that was it.
Wow.
And then as it developed, and I say as it developed, it was really over a 1 week period. Some of the people who wanted to run dropped out. And anyway, I ended up with a campaign manager who is a friend, and she had managed Congressman Stewart's campaign the last time. But when I first called her, she told me no, because another friend had been planning on getting in the race. And she said, I don't want to choose between friends. That friend didn't get in. So she agreed to manage my campaign. And then, a week later, I found a fundraiser in Utah who had planned on working on someone else's campaign, and then they didn't get in. And so, I was gathering up people slowly as I went, but I did not have an apparatus in place to start with. I had to build it as I went.
And I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and I know how crazy that is that you filed with just a treasurer and that's all you had and you just went on faith, right? It's just...
Yeah, no, this whole thing was a moonshot, and I probably should have been writing in my journal the entire time, because there's so many details I forget now because it happened so quickly that it's easy to look back now and forget that I did not know how to do it when I started.
Mm-hmm. And all the feelings that you probably were having during that period and stressors and all of that you figured it out and are a member of Congress. So that's fantastic. I love it. Have you had experiences that you talked about praying to decide whether to run and getting this is a good experience. This will be good. Not necessarily you're going to win and be the best congresswoman ever, because we don't really, that's not usual, right? You get okay, you should do this. This is a good thing. You're going to win and then run for president. But how has your faith, you're like, no, please no, influenced your journey in public service? How has that kind of been part of the journey?
That is a really good question. I am deeply religious. I have been my whole life. And I watched people get involved in politics and lose their religion, or at least have a hard time implementing the good parts of their religion into their political life. And as a staffer, I watched a lot of LDS staffers get involved in politics and then walk away from religion. And I don't know that it's politics that did it necessarily. Most staffers start in their early 20s, and that's an age where people are deciding who they want to be anyway. But I've just watched so many people get involved in politics and walk away from their religion or minimize their religion. And that was one of my concerns. I knew winning was a long shot, so I didn't give it a ton of thought at first because I wasn't sure that this would be a very long journey for me. But as I got into that first campaign, life gets hard really quickly. Campaigns are tough. And when people talk to me about why would somebody do this, why would somebody do that, I always say it's unpredictable what's going to happen to somebody when they start campaigning. You are literally putting yourself out there to be judged by a lot of strangers. And it is easy for those strangers to be really harsh and to judge harshly and to say awful things. And that does something funny to people. And some people get angry and some people get defensive. And I decided early on, I know campaigns are tough. I've watched a lot of people do them. I'm only going to do this if I can be me. And so I tried to decide early on what kind of a candidate I want to be and not stray from it. And now I talk to people a lot who want to run for office and they ask for advice. And this is almost always what I tell them. Decide before you get in the race who you are and what kind of a campaign you want to run, because you're going to have a lot of people around you. You'll hire campaign consultants. You'll have a campaign manager. You'll have a lot of people who just call you and give you advice. And all of them are going to tell you you need to be more of this or less of that. You need to get angrier. You need to be more forceful. You need to talk about these issues you don't talk about. You need to bring this part of your life into the campaign. You need to minimize that. And they may be right. And you'll get a lot of advice, but you've got to decide who you are and be true to it. And one of the things I decided is I don't want to be angry. Politics are fairly contentious. Contention doesn't lead to a happy life. And if I can't do this and have love in my heart, if I can't do this and be peaceful inside, I can't do it. I had no idea how hard that was actually going to be. As soon as you throw your hat in the ring and your name is on a ballot, people come at you for things you never expected. You think you know where your weaknesses are and what someone criticized you for, and then they come up with new and exciting ways. And I've always known that the Savior commanded us during the Sermon on the Mount to pray for our enemies. It's not something I'd given much thought to, but during that first campaign, I started doing that. And I don't tell the story very often, but this podcast seems like the perfect kind of a place for it. I made it a habit every night to pray for my enemies. And I don't really like the word enemies because I don't like thinking of someone who's running in the same race as me as an enemy, or the people online who are involved in politics. I don't want to think of them as enemies, but there are definitely people who are unkind. And I just started praying for them, sometimes by name and sometimes just as a group. And it made a huge difference in my ability to stay peaceful inside and to have love in my heart as I was campaigning. And I kept reminding myself, win or lose, these are still my neighbors. If I win, I'm still going to be representing these people, and I can't represent them if I just dismiss them and think they're awful. And if I lose, I'm still living amongst these people, and I can't happily be their neighbor if I just dismiss them and think they're awful. So one of the things that I did was start praying every night for my enemies, which I should have been doing my whole life, but had not been doing. And that was really helpful in the campaign. And then I won and I got sworn into Congress, and Mike Johnson was a brand new Speaker of the House when I got there. And he's a very religious guy. And one of the most surprising things to me as a new member of Congress is that when we would have our GOP conference, and it was just Republican members of Congress together in a room without press, without staff, really, that was one of the things he talked about almost every time. He kept saying, God raises up leaders. We're here because God raised us up for this. And so we have a responsibility, and we need to be praying for our enemies and praying for this country and trying to heal the wounds and the divides. And I've continued to pray for my enemies every night, but I think about that a lot in the larger context of, as a country, we should be trying to make our enemies our friends. As Republicans, we should be trying to make our enemies our friends. We need to be blessing those who curse us and doing good to those who despitefully use us. And I'm not always perfect at it, but I'm trying, and it does make this a lot easier. It makes it easier for me to bring my religion, my convictions with me to work every day, to the campaign every day, and do this job in a way that I can still, with a clear conscience, live my religion and not lose track.
That was a perfect answer. I asked the question about negativity and how to deal with it every podcast just about, and I've never gotten that answer before. And that is such a perfect and beautiful answer. Praying for the people who are mean to you, who are saying terrible, untrue things about you online, who you may or may not know.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could take credit for the answer, but it's Jesus's answer, and it's 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
There's good documentation out there that I didn't come up with it.
There's a reason why he said that, right? It really works.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible story of how it has helped you. And I also just want to say, I watched your campaign pretty closely, the special election, and your ability to be yourself and not try and make yourself into what people maybe think a member of Congress should look like, I think was so incredible and touched a lot of people and really was fundamental to why you won the election, because people knew you were authentic.
Thank you.
And that you wanted to represent them and really help them. And that really came through in your campaign.
I will tell you, that's one of the things I probably should have said earlier when you talked about what it's like to be a woman in the delegation. It is tough, along with decide who you are as far as your policies go and what your demeanor is going to be. I also try to tell women, decide who you are, decide you're at peace with who you are, because you're going to have a lot of well-meaning, unsolicited, very hurtful advice. I got into the race, and as a staffer, I was never the one in the spotlight. I didn't have to worry that much about how I dressed or what my makeup was like or what my hair was like. But as soon as I was a candidate, people had really strong opinions about all of those things. And I had people say, you've got to keep your hair off your face. If it makes a shadow, you look angry. You should only wear earth tones because when you wear brighter colors, it makes you look unauthentic. And if you wear red lipstick, it gives people the impression that you're lying. And I don't know where people get all this stuff. And I know it all comes from a really good place. I think all the people who told me these things were genuinely trying to help make me better. But you've got to be able to know who you are and be okay with who you are so that you're not getting pulled back and forth and here and there all the time by people who are trying to help, but could introduce just a lot of chaos and anxiety and uncertainty into your life. And I look back at some of the things I wore to events or whatever, and I'm like, I've learned a lot since then. But you just have to keep learning and keep moving forward and just know who you are at your core, and the other stuff at the periphery might change. It'll take care of itself, but you've got to be grateful for the body that God blessed you with and the face that God blessed you with and the talents that God blessed you with, and use them and not let other people get under your skin when they criticize them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think your background too, as a staffer and working on that side of things, I'm sure you saw members of Congress who ran and then became completely different people. I know I certainly have in politics, and that you were aware of that and affirmatively said, that's not going to happen to me. I know who I am. And even if all these consultants and people are in my ear telling me not to wear red lipstick, or that's a small thing, right? That's not the core of who you are, but it
is a small thing, but it's a good example of the kind of things that you just don't think are going to matter. And then for some reason, they really matter to people, and they'll call, they'll send messages, and you just have to learn which things to listen to and which things to ignore.
And especially if you're a woman, like I don't think the men are getting a lot of feedback on their appearances, but women.
I don't think the men get told that if they wear a paisley tie, it makes them look angry, or they get criticized. I'm not trying to say that this only happens to women, but I think it happens more often to women. And I think it happens more often to women from sources that really are friendly and sincere and think they're being helpful.
Trying to help. Yeah. Kudos to you for knowing who you are and keeping that core within yourself, because I've seen that happen a lot with politicians that just lose that so easily once they get some success, or even if they don't get success. So that's amazing that you've been able to do that. So we're almost out of time, unfortunately, but I wanted to ask you, one of the things we always ask at the end of the podcast is if you have an invitation for our listeners. We're trying to get more women to run for office, to get involved, be on boards and commissions, anything really in the public sphere. Do you have an invitation for them or advice for them on getting involved?
I do, as a matter of fact. My invitation to anyone who watches this podcast is figure out ways to support other women as they go. We talk about this all the time, but I think sometimes women don't know how to support other women in a field that they're not in. And there aren't very many people who run for office, and so it's a small field. But some of the best people in the world have come out of the woodwork to support me, and it means the world. Even when it's just someone who says, hey, when things get ugly, when people are attacking you, call me and I'll remind you how much I think of you, that I think you're great. Those kind of things keep someone going. Women need other women. It's just a fact. We do. We need support. We need people in our corner cheering for us. And if you're the kind of person who wants to run for office, go connect with other women who've run, learn from them. I don't think I'm unique in that I feel a responsibility to make this path easier for women who come behind me. Even with law school, I didn't know any lawyers when I went to law school, and I promised myself if I got through it, I would be there to help other people who are applying. And anytime someone reaches out to me and says, I'm applying for law school, do you have any advice? I make time to talk to them, because that's a debt that I owe. So be that kind of a mentor if you've had the experience. And if you're the kind of woman who enjoys politics, but you're never going to run, find ways to support other women who are running. Find ways to cheer them on, to go out and put out a few signs. Whatever you can do to support another woman who's putting herself out there. It's lonely out there. I talked to Chris Stewart when I had been in for about a month. I said, the thing you didn't tell me is how lonely this job is. And he laughed and said, I think you forget after you're in it for a while. But it is. There's not a big network of other people who've done it. And women who run and lose, I know several, and they have a really hard time with it because they feel like they put themselves out there. They were very vulnerable and they got rejected. So reach out to your friends. Tell them they're awesome. Remind them that just running is incredible. Remind them that the desire to be involved in public service is incredible. And just, we believe in our faith that we have a responsibility to mourn with those who mourn and comfort those who stand in need of comfort and bear each other's burdens. And that applies in politics too. Go mourn with a friend who ran and didn't make it. Go cheer with a friend who ran and did make it, because that's the flip side of the same coin. If we're bearing each other's burdens, then we get to glory in each other's triumphs as well. So that's my advice.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you for taking time right now to talk to us. This was incredible, and I loved hearing everything. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. So I really appreciate you. I know how busy it is right now. So it's fantastic, and good luck on the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me a platform to talk about the spiritual side of this journey. And that's important, that it's not something that I can do in every forum, but it's something I want on the record so I can look back at it later.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said some wonderful things that I know are going to inspire other women of faith to run and be involved. So thank you. Thank you all for listening to the Project Elected podcast. For free resources and materials, head over to projectelectwomen.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as Project Elect Women. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate us, or give us a review on iTunes. So until next time, thank you.